What if your constant thoughts aren't about them, but about you, seen through them? There's a kind of ache that doesn't make sense to the rational mind. You go on with your life, yet they keep appearing. In the spaces between tasks, in dreams, in songs you didn't mean to hear. But this isn't obsession, it's the echo of an emotional imprint that was never witnessed, never completed, because it was never just about the person. It was about the part of your soul that came alive in their presence, and then was left hanging, invisible, unspoken, unclaimed. Carl Jung believed people don't just enter our lives, they constellate archetypes. This means we don't simply meet people. We collide with parts of ourselves that have been forgotten. The lover, the mother, the rescuer, the shadow. When someone walks into your life carrying an archetype you've unconsciously exiled, they become more than a person. They become a symbol, a psychic mirror of your deepest hunger, and the soul never forgets the mirrors that cracked it open. Gregg Braden speaks of emotional coherence, the deep resonance between the heart, brain, and soul field. That feeling of being home in someone else's energy. It wasn't necessarily a sign they were your destiny. It was that, for a moment, they matched your inner frequency of longing. They sang the same silent song you've always carried inside. So why can't you stop thinking about them? Because it's not just about them, it's about the wound they mirrored, the version of you they briefly lit up, the part of your psyche that woke up in their presence and hasn't been seen since. This is not a love story. This is an archetypal summons, a psychic invitation to turn inward and finally meet the part of you that they temporarily reflected. There's a moment, often brief, often quiet, when someone enters the room and something inside you stirs. Not because of what they say, not even because of who they are, but because of how you feel in their presence. It's subtle, like the body remembering a language it once spoke fluently. You come alive in ways you forgot you could. Your laughter has more air in it. Your gaze lingers longer. Your inner child leans forward. This is not about attraction. This is about activation. The psyche doesn't fall in love with strangers. It falls in love with the parts of itself that someone else unknowingly reflects back. When you felt chosen, when you felt seen, when you felt wanted, you weren't just responding to a person. You were responding to a self-state, a sacred emotional frequency that lived inside you, waiting to be reawakened. And now that they're gone, what you miss is not them. It's you in their presence. It's the version of yourself that had permission to feel alive, wanted, worthy. That's the part you long for, and that's why the thought keeps returning, not as memory but as a summons. Because the ache is not about losing the person, it's about losing access to the self that emerged when you stood in their light. There's a symbolic truth here. They didn't bring you something new. They opened a door in you, and then left it ajar. And now you're standing in front of that door, wondering how to get back to the feeling, not the figure. It's like tasting your voice for the first time, and then losing it in the wind. This is why the thought lingers, not to pull you toward them, but to call you back to the part of your soul that briefly remembered how to sing. There's a kind of longing that disguises itself as divine confirmation. You feel their name rise again and again. You see strange patterns, a song, a glance, a dream, and something in you whispers, this must mean something. But not all repetition is revelation. Not every returning thought is a sign from the universe. Sometimes it is a memory looking for closure. Sometimes it is the echo of a wound that never got to speak. In moments of emotional rupture, the ego clings to meaning because meaning feels like control. If I still think of them, the mind says, then surely they're meant to return. But the soul has different logic. It doesn't seek control. It seeks completion. Gregg Braden reminds us that synchronicity is not always a green light. Sometimes it is a mirror, a signal not that the path lies ahead, but that something within remains unresolved. Thoughts that return again and again are not always signs to move forward. They can be symbols of what remains unintegrated, a call not toward them, but toward the part of you still echoing in the aftermath. It is like confusing a storm warning for a wedding invitation. Just because something is loud doesn't mean it's loving. Just because it repeats doesn't mean it's right. There's a deeper truth here. You don't think about them because the universe is speaking. You think about them because you are still listening for the piece of yourself that never felt fully met in their presence. And so the mind returns, not to predict the future, but to witness what was left behind. Some bonds don't begin with a spark. They begin with a silence that feels familiar, a gaze that arrives not as discovery, but as reminder. What if it wasn't love in the traditional sense? What if it was recognition, not of the other person's story, but of your own? Sometimes we meet someone and their presence awakens something ancient, not from the past life necessarily, but from the symbolic past we carry within. A pattern, a feeling, a psychic blueprint we never knew was unfinished. It's not them we collapse into. It's the emotional architecture they match inside us. And when that match feels precise enough, the illusion of destiny begins. But this isn't fate, it's memory. A soul memory that doesn't live in the brain, but in the body's unspoken archive. You weren't meeting a stranger, you were meeting an echo. And that's why it felt so real, so immediate, so deep. They weren't your future. They were the part of your symbolic past that never completed itself. And you weren't in love. You were falling into your own unfinished language. That's why the mind keeps circling back, not because you lost the one, but because the sentence you began in their presence still wants to end. Obsession isn't about holding on. It's about trying to close the loop. It's like returning to a dream over and over, not for the fantasy, but for the chance to wake up inside it and write the final line your soul never got to say. Not all time is measured by clocks. Some moments linger, held not in the mind, but in the body's silent memory. You may have moved on in story, but the nervous system remembers where it fractured, when an emotional rupture happens, an abandonment, a goodbye that came too soon, a connection that dissolved without clarity. The psyche doesn't always process it in words. It holds it in freeze, like a room you left mid-sentence, only to find the door still ajar every time you pass it in your mind. You're not choosing to revisit, you're still inside it. Bruce Lipton describes how emotional imprints live within cellular memory, not just as thoughts, but as felt echoes. And when something within us is unresolved, the body keeps searching for the exit it never found. That's why the thoughts return not logically, but somatically. You don't remember them in your head, you relive them in your chest, your breath, your stomach. Like a skipping record trying to reach the next track. The nervous system, left unsoothed, loops. Not because it wants to reattach, but because it was never able to release. And this is why closure through words alone is rarely enough. The psyche doesn't seek answers. It seeks safety. It seeks the moment where it no longer needs to brace itself. Like music trapped in a groove, the memory will repeat until something inside lifts the needle. The return of thoughts is not regression. It's a quiet plea for completion, a call to step gently back into the moment where you left yourself behind. Sometimes it's not the person we can't release, it's the symbol they carried. In Jungian language, every soul relationship touches a deeper pattern, a mythic role already waiting within us. When they entered your life, they weren't just themselves. They arrived carrying the weight of an ancient image, the lover, the father, the muse, the rebel, the one who sees, saves, awakens, abandons. And so, your bond was never simply personal. It was archetypal. They stirred something that lived far beneath your conscious story. This is why the loss feels disproportionate. Why a brief encounter can feel like the collapse of a lifetime. Because they touched a part of your inner world that had no other name until them. But here's the deeper truth. You were not entangled with their personality. You were entangled with the energy they temporarily embodied. And energy, unlike identity, lives in many forms. It visits through dreams, strangers, synchronicities. It echoes in songs, books, or in the shadowed spaces of your memory. Until you meet that archetype within, you will continue seeking it without, in eyes that almost resemble theirs, in voices that almost make you feel the same. It's like chasing a silhouette you yourself cast on the wall. You reach for it, believing it to be other, but it was always you, projected outward, longing to be re-owned. This is why they don't leave easily. Not because they're meant to return, but because the part of your psyche they carried still waits to be reclaimed. Not every ending is an exit. Some stories don't close with goodbye. They remain open, not in words but in energy. There are people we never got to speak the truth to, not because we didn't want to, but because we didn't yet know how. And so the conversation lives on, silent, suspended, like a letter left unsent in the drawer of the soul. Gregg Braden describes emotional coherence as the alignment of heart, mind, and field. When this alignment is ruptured, by confusion, avoidance, or a premature ending, the energy doesn't release. It stays, orbiting, not as hope, not as destiny, but as unfinished frequency. You may not be holding on to the person. You may be holding on to the version of yourself that didn't yet know what to say. The choice you didn't make. The words you rehearsed but never gave voice. The truth that trembled inside but remained unspoken. Energetic contracts don't break with distance. They dissolve through integration. And until the field feels complete, your psyche may replay the same moment, searching for the exit that never came. Sometimes it appears in dreams. Sometimes it revisits you in waves of irrational memory. Not to torment, but to remind you, the energy still waits for closure. Not with them, but within you. It's like replying to a letter that was never mailed. Not because the other needs to read it, but because your soul still carries the ink. And healing in this space is not forgetting. It is finally letting the unsaid be spoken, even if only in the sacred intimacy of your own inner world. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. There's a kind of obsession that doesn't come from longing, but from what was never allowed to speak. The mind loops, the memory replays, the name returns, and beneath it all is not just desire, but a silenced self. You may believe you're haunted by someone else's absence, but often what truly haunts is the version of yourself that was never fully heard in their presence. The one who loved without holding back. The one who stayed quiet, afraid to ask. The one who felt too much, and later pretended to feel nothing at all. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the hidden parts of the psyche we exile in order to survive. But these parts don't die. They become voices beneath the floorboards. They become rumination. They become the thought that won't leave, because it is not just about them. It is the self begging to be witnessed. This is not weakness. This is not madness. This is the soul's attempt to restore its own voice. Obsession often marks the place where something in you was never given closure, not by another, but by you. You don't need them to validate your wound. You need to see the part of you that carries it. And perhaps that is where the true turning begins, not by forgetting, but by listening. Listen to the version of yourself that loved them, the one that dreamed, that waited, that stayed silent. Let that part speak, not in judgment, but in dignity, like lighting a candle, not to remember them, but to finally see yourself in the dark. Some names are not heavy because of who they belong to, but because of what they carried on our behalf. When someone walks into your life as an archetype, they become more than a person. They become a portal, and part of your soul steps through them, forgetting that it was always your own. This is why letting go is not about detachment. It is about retrieval, not of the relationship, but of the energy that awakened through it. To name what they were to you is to begin the process of reintegration, not by erasing them, but by separating the symbol from the figure, by understanding that what stirred in their presence was not theirs to keep. If they carried the lover, it was your longing for sensuality, boldness, devotion. If they carried the savior, it was your hidden wish to be rescued from your own silence. If they carried the rebel, it was the part of you that still waits for permission to choose yourself. You are not releasing a person. You are reclaiming a fragment of your own myth. The soul remembers its projections, and healing begins when those projections return, no longer as longing, but as living energy. It's like writing their name in soft ink, and beneath it, writing the archetype they embodied, then gently crossing out the name and letting the archetype remain. The symbol stays, but now it belongs to you. This is not the end of a connection. It is the return of what was always yours, like retrieving your reflection from a shattered mirror and realizing it was never about them. It was about the part of you that came alive when you believed it could only live through someone else. You don't think about them because you are fragile. You think about them because something in their presence touched a truth you hadn't yet found in yourself. What lingers is not them. It's the part of you that came alive through them. The moment your soul caught its own reflection in their eyes and whispered, "There I am." This is not weakness. It is soul work. Obsession is not always about wanting them back. It is often the psyche's most intimate way of calling you home. Not to the past, but to the unfinished self you left behind in the relationship. This is not a haunting. This is a sacred invitation. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And yet, that is what this memory ultimately asks of you. Gregg Braden reminds us that coherence, the full alignment of heart, brain, and spirit, is what brings peace. And coherence doesn't come from reattaching. It comes from remembering who you were before the longing began. So if their name still rises in your mind, if their energy still echoes in the quiet spaces of your day, know this. It may not be to bring you back to them. It may be to bring you back to the version of yourself who awakened in their presence and is still waiting to be fully lived. That is the real return, not to the other, but to the you that love revealed.